Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. With me on the program today, Dave McKinney is joining us again from WBEZ Radio in Chicago, and formerly a Springfield resident as well in the press room when he was with the Chicago Sun-Times. Dave, welcome back.
Bernie, how are you?
I'm good. And speaking of the Chicago Sun-Times, a 24-year veteran of that is with us also, but better known for some other things, including being a professor emeritus at University of Illinois Springfield, head of the Public Affairs Reporting Program, graduate program there. Charlie Wheeler is with us to spread his knowledge far and wide about state government and all things Illinois. Charlie, welcome back.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you for such a what would you say, flattering introduction.
Well, I had to explain all those years you doing stuff so people would understand how you can get a beard like that. So on we go. your pandemic beard. Dave,
yes.
let's start with you. Chris Welch, state representative from Hillside, has been the chair of the Special Investigative Committee looking into House Speaker Michael Madigan. He is a Democrat, one of 3 Democrats on that committee that was formed at the behest of Republicans, and there are 3 Republicans. He said, you guys are making this too political. We're not going to do this anymore until after the election, and the Republicans are not happy about that. Tell us more, Dave McKinney.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've had a couple of hearings so far, and of course, you know, Welch, I think, does have a point in the timing of the committee is right ahead of this election, and of course, there are a lot of legislative campaigns that are now underway. And, 2 of the members on the Republican delegation are Tier 1 Democratic targets, Deanne Mazzocchi from Elmhurst and Grant Worley from Naperville. And so, there has been the Democrats have, in addition to rallying behind Mike Madigan, they've been kind of dishing it back at Republicans, accusing them of, really just trying to gin this issue up. Now, I mean, I think it's, we know the background of this, don't we? I mean, it's, there was a settlement, a $200 million settlement back in July between ComEd and the U.S. Attorney's Office to settle a bribery investigation. And that involved a whole host of players inside Madigan's orbit who were involved in getting some money to, money, jobs, contracts, et cetera. And ComEd said that the purpose in spreading that largesse around was to influence Madigan and to help their Springfield agenda. So that's really at the core of this. The Republicans have desperately wanted Madigan to testify. He said, I'm not going to testify. There's nothing illegal about, trying to find people jobs. In fact, as a legislator, that's what he says he should be doing. So really, it's just kind of an impasse right now. I mean, the only thing I think we have to look forward to with this committee, assuming they do reconvene after November 3rd, there was a former ComEd executive, Fidel Marquez, who was their top in-house lobbyist, who has pled guilty to a bribery-related charge. There is an effort to try to get him to testify, and Chairman Welch seemed to be somewhat amenable to having him come there. So, if that happens, it might, twist the screw a little tighter, but I can say pretty safely at this point that this has not, evolved into much of a headache for Mike Madigan.
Yeah, well, and of course he, says he's done nothing wrong and he's not been indicted or anything like that, although he is named as public official A in the agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office, I guess a deferred prosecution agreement with Commonwealth Edison in which I guess if they go 3 years, is it 3 years with being just towing the line and not doing anything wrong, then it goes away, other than the $200 million that they're supposed to be paying as a penalty. Charlie, I don't know how much you watch all of this commercial TV, but I watch a lot of commercial TV and listen to a lot of commercial radio, and Mike Madigan is just all over TV still in races around Springfield where Republicans are trying to attack Democrats. And saying that they are linked to Mike Madigan, who, of course, in addition to being Speaker of the House, is chairman of the Democratic Party of Illinois. This has been done before. Do you think it has any more effect this year when we also have President Trump on the ballot, which may or may not influence races as well?
I don't know. I mean, the let's make it about Madigan. That's been around, Lord knows how long. People have tried to say, oh, if you're a Democrat, you're a slave of Mike Madigan, that kind of thing. It's not worked in the past. I'm not sure it's going to work particularly well this time around because it's kind of an old song. And I think one of the questions I have is if all you can talk about is how bad Mike Madigan is, what kind of an agenda do you have? What kind of public policy ideas are you putting forth to address the needs of the people of Illinois? I'm not sure it's enough to say, he's bad, so vote for me. If you don't tell people, here's what I want to do to make life better for you. And there's sort of an irony, too, because one of the things that Welch asked for, he asked for ComEd to provide all kinds of documentation and background of every contact they had with every legislative leader, a huge dump of information. The Republicans criticized him for him, and I think Welch makes the point that, well, ComEd worked with other people besides people allegedly aligned with Madigan. And if you look at the two major bills that were focused on by the U.S. attorney, both of them had bipartisan support. And interestingly enough, one of them, the Future Energy Jobs Act, which was passed in 2016, Mike Madigan didn't vote for even. He was not voting on the roll call on third reading, whereas Jim Durkin, the Republican leader, voted for it, as did all the other leaders. And the other one they talked about, a bill from 2011, that was vetoed by Governor Quinn, and it was overridden. And everybody, all the leaders in both chambers, voted for the override. And as a matter of fact, the earlier bill, the Future Energy Jobs Act, was signed into law by Bruce Rauner. So I think Welch's point is, to whatever extent ComEd tried to influence Madigan, maybe they also tried to influence other legislative leaders in the Senate and in the House.
Yeah,
so I think that's a valid question to be raised.
Well, and certainly ComEd provides electricity to a whole giant swath of Illinois. Dave, just one other thing about the Madigan situation. We know within the last 10 days or so, Stephanie Kieffer, a state representative from, I believe it's Oswego, I know it's near Aurora, made an announcement that she is running against Mike Madigan, which allowed the Republicans to challenge Democrats running for the House. Well, are you for Madigan or are you for Kieffer? Has that seemed to have any effect on the way any of these races are going, as you can tell so far?
Well, I don't think it's had any effect. But I mean, look, it's an unusual thing. Even, if she still is a candidate, by the time January rolls around and there's a vote for speaker, I mean, that will be a novel experience because, Madigan always just kind of steamrolls his way through these speaker votes without any opposition. Now, I don't think that there's a gigantic groundswell for her. In fact, I don't know that, there have only been, I think, six female House members who have advocated for Madigan to step down as speaker. And so, they have 74 members currently. And if there's a big wave election that, and they expand their members, I mean, there's a big cushion right now for Madigan, because he just needs 60 votes out of the 74 that they have currently. And if that, as I say, if that expands, he's got even more room. So it's the Kieffer is, she has this history with Madigan. She has been a critic of his in the past, but I don't know that she has succeeded thus far in trying to build, lay a foundation of where, she's going to be able to even, pick off 15 or 20 members, because she would have to do that to get Madigan below 60 votes.
Right. And I haven't heard of any endorsements yet. She is a Marine, so, not to be trifled with. But we'll see where it goes. And Dave, one more quick thing. You talked about a wave election. Do we think, is President Trump, and I've asked this before, but is President Trump a bigger factor in parts of the state than Mike Madigan, or do they even each other out?
Well, I think that's why you see Republicans, trying to just flog Madigan to death, because you're right, Charlie. I mean, I remember all the way back to 2012, I think it was. That was when, if I'm not mistaken, that's when the Republicans had they opened up an online Madigan store where you could buy sweatshirts for your dog or something that had anti-Madigan stuff on it. They're using him to counteract Trump. And Trump is he is a potent force, to the detriment, I would say, for Republicans in the suburbs. I mean, we see that across the country, in suburbia, where not only seniors, but women voters especially are flocking to the Democrats because of just basically being turned off at the president. And that really puts the suburban House Republican delegation here in Illinois at risk, where they're not as big of a force as they were in the 90s and early 2000s. I think in the House, there are about 15 of them that represent the collar counties. And as I mentioned, Worley and Mazzocchi, both on that special investigating committee, if they lose their seats, it just kind of diminishes the influence that the House Republicans have. It concentrates power for that caucus downstate. And it just becomes kind of they become less relevant, by the day. So that's why they're doing it. They're trying to counteract Trump.
Yeah. And interestingly, as someone covering politics in Central Illinois, President Trump, won this area. There's some indication, I guess there was a poll put out by Betsy Dirksen-Londrigan's campaign, done by an outside firm. She's a Democrat running against Rodney Davis in the 13th Congressional District, that actually had Trump a few points down to Biden in that poll. We don't know if that's true because there's a lot of Trump signs in rural areas. There's still popularity, but you just don't know if kind of everything that's going on in the White House and coming out of Washington is going to drive many middle-of-the-road Republicans in the other direction or not. But I think it's a harder sell for that in Central Illinois. And Mike Madigan is really well known in Central Illinois because, of course, this is where the state capital is as well. And so the anti-Madigan stuff seems to have traction. But I guess we're all going to find out by November 3rd or whenever they get the votes counted, which in Illinois they legally can do up to 14 days after. So by November 17th, we'll have the count.
Bernie, it strikes me that in probably most areas south of Springfield and a lot of the areas north and west, the rural areas, Madigan is like icing on the cake for the Republicans because the average voter is very much a Trump fan. And so they don't really need anything additional. And as Dave said, the problem for the Republicans at the state level is going to be in the suburbs because the Democrats have made inroads in the suburbs that when I started as a reporter would have been unthinkable. Electing Democrats from DuPage County? Come on. From Kane County? You got to be kidding. Now, we had multi-member districts, so you had one House member, Democrat, from those areas. But when we went to single-member districts for the 82 election, you didn't see Democrats from those areas. Now that's all changed. Part of it, I think, is because the Republican Party has shifted from what it was 30, 40 years ago. Part of it also is just the demographic change with people of color moving into areas that they would have been ostracized from in the past. So the whole Illinois electorate is changing. And in my judgment, the change does not bode well for Republicans.
Well, we will see where that goes.
Bernie, can I throw in one other thought here about, that Londrigan poll you mentioned? I mean, you see polling in battleground states like Georgia and Florida and Ohio and Texas, places that would be ruby red normally. Mm-hmm. And they're all either ties or Biden is up by a point or two. And I think if that phenomenon is happening around the country in battleground states, safe Republican battleground states, I do think that in some of these areas downstate, like this congressional race you're talking about, it could be a factor. Trump's unpopularity seems to rise by the day.
Yeah, well, we will keep watching that because the news out of Washington truly changes about by the minute and by the tweet. So on we go. Another giant issue in this election, and I'll throw it to you, Charlie Wheeler, is the tax amendment, the amendment that would change the Illinois Constitution that's on the November 3rd ballot to say we no longer have to have a flat income tax. We can have a progressive income tax. Advocates, including Governor Pritzker, say that means only the top 3% people making $250,000 a year or more will pay more, and everybody else will pay the same or less. But opponents of it say, no, don't trust the Democrats that run the legislature and that Democratic governor. They will dip down and change the rates once they get that rule change or that constitutional change and, tax the middle class more. Somebody named Ken Griffin, who is, I believe, now known as the second richest man in Illinois, he's worth about $15 billion, has donated more than $46 million to the anti-tax amendment crew. On the other hand, Governor Pritzker has donated like 55 or 56 million himself to the pro side. Charlie, that is a very intense battle, and part of it is about can retirement income be taxed, which it is not now under the Illinois income tax. Give us kind of an update on where that big battle sits.
Well, in terms of whether it's going to prevail or not, I don't know, but the bottom line boils down to, I think the proponents say, here's what it says, and if it's passed, this is what will happen, guaranteed, because the rates are already set out in law. With the conditional clause, this act becomes effective if and only if the constitutional amendment is adopted. That sets the rates, as you say, so that 97% of the Illinois population pays the same or less, and only 3% pay at a steeper rate. Most other states with income taxes have graduated rates, and so does the federal government, of course. The opponents say, well, you can't trust them, and the first thing they'll do is they'll tax retirement income. I would argue that that's sort of misleading in the sense that if the legislature wanted to, they could come into special session tomorrow and pass a law taxing retirement income. And some of the anti-ads have had senior citizens saying, well, I don't want my Social Security taxed, and if this amendment passes, that'll happen. I can make fun of that because I am a senior citizen, obviously. But it's totally misleading. As a matter of fact, a number of the leading advocates for senior citizens, including AARP, had a news conference up in Chicago to say that that's bogus, that this does not allow retirement income to be passed. You would need to pass a separate law. And as one of the supporters of the so-called fair tax said, trying to tax retirement income is political suicide. Yeah. And I think that's probably so, because geezers like me vote more than you younger guys do.
Yeah. And David, it's interesting because one opening that the Republicans have had is that Michael Frerichs, the state treasurer, had said at a suburban event some months ago, well, this would allow taxation of retirement income. And yet he's not for it. And the Democrats in the General Assembly and the governor are not for it. They could, as Charlie mentioned, they could raise it right now under existing law, and they haven't. And I remember there was some talk of it. I think former Senate President Cullerton, he just mentioned the idea once at a speech in Chicago, and there was such a blowback that he took it right off the table. So in Illinois, it is kind of the third rail. So Dave and Treasurer Frerichs, I know, probably doesn't feel very good about just mentioning the fact that it would make it legal, but even he's not for it, correct?
Correct. I mean, it was back in June when he went in front of a Chamber of Commerce in Des Plaines in the northwest suburbs, and that's where he raised this point. And he talked about, taxing retirement income kind of on a sliding scale, the way that it's being talked about now generally with income tax rates. And I think, if I understood correctly, I think that the point he was trying to make is that, the Sam Zells of the world who are, in their 60s and 70s and billionaires, they could be taxed at a higher rate and could afford a tax on retirement income. The people who are making, I don't know, whatever it is, $30,000 a year off of Social Security, those people, of course, they can't afford to do that. And anybody knows that. And so I think it was, Frerichs was out freelancing on this, and he's had to really walk it back. And it was a bit of an embarrassment. But, I'm like you, Charlie. This race is a little, it's going to be a really close call. And I can't get a good read on it. If you do the math, you can get a sense, like, I think that the rates that they're talking about range from a low of 4% up to a high of 7.99%. And if you do the math, I just pulled out Pritzker's 2018 tax filing the other day, and I was looking at, I think he and his wife reported 4.3 million in income between the two of them. And I think if you did the math so that they would be taxed at 7.99%, as they would be if the amendment passes, they'd be looking at about $130,000 additionally in taxes if this amendment goes through. And, Pritzker will say gladly, he's willing to pay that because he thinks he's obligated to. We all drive on roads and we want good schools. But I think there are all sorts of diversionary tactics here. This retirement income thing is a classic one, where there is a problem. And I think there's a general skepticism people have that whenever you wade into the issue of taxation, especially given the track record in Springfield with corruption, that people don't trust what is being told to them about what the intentions are. And it's unfortunate.
And the word tax is in that amendment, and tax is a bad word.
Yeah.
Well, one of the ironies, too, is one of the groups that is very opposed to this also has put out position papers, who's opposed to the amendment, has put out position papers suggesting one of the things the state should do is tax retirement income.
Right. That's the Civic Committee of the Commercial
Civic
Club
Committee,
in Chicago,
yeah.
which is a lot of big business folks. Yeah, that's very interesting. And it's not going to happen. And so the governor's been able to say, well, it's the opponents that want to tax your retirement income. And that's, I think, what he's referring to. There's an interesting issue going on. Our judges, as we know in Illinois, are still elected, but for Supreme Court judges, they have to be retained every 10 years. And in the 3rd district over in Western Illinois, Dave, let's go to you. Tom Kilbride is going for retention as he did 10 years ago, and that's turned into a big race. The Republican Party is trying to beat him. Business groups are trying to beat him, meaning they don't want him to get the 60% of the vote or 50% of everybody voting in that election. If maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just 60%. I'm mixing that up with the tax amendment.
Yeah.
He's trying to be retained, and there's people trying to stop him. Tell us a little about where that's at.
Well, this one is a campaign that has kind of flown under the radar a little bit, but it sets up a situation where conceivably control of the Supreme Court, which now Democrats control, could tilt toward Republicans under the right circumstances. The reason this is interesting is because this district, it's an oddly configured district that runs really from the Mississippi River all the way over to the Indiana border. It includes the Quad Cities, Peoria, and then Will County, so it just kind of meanders that way. And Kilbride has held that seat. He first won in 2000 and was retained again in 2010. And now he's trying for another 10-year term on the court. And as you mentioned, he has to get a 60% vote in that among the 21 counties that make up that district he represents. Now, what's interesting, I did the math the other day, and I think out of the 21 counties, there are 18 of them that voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And it was, in that district, Trump carried the district, I think about 48% to 45% for Clinton. So you can see the numbers there that there are Republicans. It's a Republican-dominated district. Kilbride, he got lightning in a bottle basically, and was able to, kind of overcome that, and so he's now really, facing this big push to unseat him. Now, there have been 19 examples since 1970 where Supreme Court justices have run for retention. And there have been close calls. I mean, the Kilbride one in 2010 was close. And then there was one, I believe, in 2014 with Lloyd Carmeier that was close. But these generally are just pro forma things that just get done. And so, history is on Kilbride's side here, but it's going to be a close call. And I think, Kilbride is treating it that way because he's on TV everywhere. And there's a lot of money going into both sides of this.
Yeah, interesting. And it's a big Republican push. And business groups are opposed too, but there was a column that ran in our paper by Scott Reeder, who is now freelance, just talking about he's really quite moderate, even though he's a Democrat. Charlie, we only have a minute left, but give me a little history. That 10-year ago race was really expensive, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. As a matter of fact, when he was retained in 2010, between Kilbride and between the people who were opposed to him, $3.4 million was spent. And that was more money than was spent on all the retention races for Supreme Court justices all over the country from 2000 to 2009. So it was expensive before, it'll be expensive again. And it's, as Dave said, The Lloyd Carmeier race 6 years ago was $2.3 billion between those who for him and those who wanted him to be retired.
Yeah, and yet it's really hard to defeat a judge when he or she is seeking attention. With that, Dave McKinney and Charlie Wheeler, I will take this opportunity to thank you for joining me. It's always fun to talk to you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.